I want to give a warm welcome to everybody who's joining us today, whether it's noon your time or a different time zone. We're glad to have you here. Um, with the purpose of our meeting, as you know, I'm sure, is to help people learn how to take action to defend California's new clean trucking rule. We're going to go ahead to the next slide. So there are two of us that are presenting today, and we want to also give a shout out to Leah, who's our intern, and she's helping with all the background. So we couldn't do it without her. Thank you, Leah. And you'll hear from Judy Borcht, who is our lead of the transportation team, and I'm the new director of campaigns and volunteer engagement. And we'll also have a special guest speaker joining us, Sandy Naranjo, to share her story. She has grown up in a port community and will share how the diesel truck exhaust has affected her personally. And the next screen. So today's agenda, we will tell you a little bit about our organization if you're not familiar with Climate Action California. Judy's going to share background on California's Advanced Clean Fleets Rule, what it's going to do and why it's been stalled, and why it's so important to implement it ASAP. Then the heart of it will be sharing with you how you can help us convince the EPA to approve the ACF rule. And at the end, how you can get involved with Climate Action California if you're not involved and would like to learn more. We'll also leave some time for questions and answers. So with that, I will tell you a little bit about Climate Action California. We are a volunteer-run nonprofit organization of over 11,000 members. Of those, about 8,000 are based in California, but we do have over 3,000 in other states. We advocate for local, state, and federal climate policies and legislation, and our particular focus is aiming to create a just, equitable, low-carbon economy and a healthy planet through reducing emissions of short-lived climate pollutants, electrifying transportation like we are talking about today, and promoting public transit, and accelerating our society to a low-carbon future. I'm really excited to be part of an organization that is so centering the volunteers. We have a very lean staff, and the volunteers do the vast majority of the work. And we'll be telling you more about how we're organized and how you can get involved at the end. So the next screen, I think this is where we're passing it over to Judy. Judy, take it away.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm Judy Bortz, and I've been leading the transportation group for Climate Action California for the past few years. As part of that effort, I joined the Advanced Trucking Coalition back in, I think, 1921 to work on trucking regulations. And I did that because transportation is a leading contributor to GHG emissions and poor air quality in the state. And if you peel the onion, trucks represent only about 5% of the units on the road, but about 30% of the emissions. So what we do about truck emissions really matters. So after a 3-year process, somebody is not muted and they're on the telephone. If you could change your mute. Thank you. So what we do about truck emissions really matters. The state undertook a 3-year process, the California Air Resources Board, the California Air Resources Group. And then after that 3-year process, which involved a lot of hearings, public hearings, reviews of the rule, the CARB board voted unanimously to adopt the rule in April of 2023. And that was a really, really big deal. Now, the ACF rule, the trucking rule, followed what was called the ACT, or Advanced Clean Truck Rule, which was a rule that affected manufacturers and asked them to start getting EVs produced. But they wanted to have some kind of guarantee that there would be demand. So they were looking for an ACF kind of rule because they wanted to say, well, if I'm going to do all this work to manufacture trucks, who's going to buy them? So California followed with the ACF rule. And that was to get people to transition, companies, governments to transition to EVs. So the ACF was developed. And in fact, there are many, many EV trucks already available from manufacturers like Tesla, Daimler, Volvo, and Volkswagen. There are roughly, right now, about 12,000 EVs on the road. And that was as of last year, there was 10,000 were purchased, and the year before that, about 2,000. So we had a major increase given this rule from 1922 to 1923, and it's only increasing as more and more people see the benefits of this rule. Now, I wanted to just give you a little bit of background about the coalition that worked on this, because it was a very big coalition, which was actually spearheaded by Better World Group, which is where I'm borrowing some of these blue slides from. There were over 70 groups when I started, and I think it grew to over 100. And that included the environmental justice groups, the groups like you might expect, like Sierra Club, the NRDC, the Union of Concerned Scientists, Earth Justice, and some of those people were lawyers. And we also had a big representation from the California Teamsters. So often we get asked if labor was involved in this, and yes, the Teamsters were on board with this rule. The group met monthly and developed white papers and draft regulations that we submitted as recommendations to CARB. And then eventually the group would meet with CARB members to give them further information about the rules so they could ask questions, they could really understand different components of the rule. And we could advocate for some stronger rules. I mean, there were always obviously some rules that we wanted that didn't actually happen when the final one came out. And we'll look to the future to make some changes. So the ACF rule, when implemented, will significantly improve air quality in the state and particularly helps disadvantaged communities close to ports, rail yards, and warehouse corridors in places like the Central Valley. Other than state and government fleets, note that the rule specifically addresses larger fleets owned or operated by companies with revenues of 50 million or more. The rule is working to hold companies responsible rather than what you sometimes hear of independent operators, because often in this state, well, actually, it's even in the country, independent operators are not really independent. They may own the truck, but their whole schedule is determined by these larger companies. So we felt the ACF Coalition felt it was really important that it was the companies that were going to be held responsible for this, not the individual small independent fleet owner. So we see that this rule, because of the health issues that poor air results in, like asthma, that's something people see everywhere, that this is going to project for lots and lots, 50-some billion dollars worth of health savings through 2050 and save actual lives. So we think this fleet rule, and actually we think the fleet rule has a lot of benefits actually for the corporations, because when you look at the total cost of ownership of some of these vehicles, it's a lot lower than it is operating a diesel truck. So let's talk about the four main elements of the rule. So first of all, as of 2036, all new trucks that will be sold in the state will be EVs. There are some exceptions, and there's a whole exception process if a type of truck is not available. And one that I've been called out is cement trucks, and they may not likely be available by 2036. So there's a whole exemption process. However, the fossil fuel trucks can still be bought and sold in the state. They'll just be used. So we need to make the transition, though the aftermarket will still be in place. Now, second of all, the drayage truck requirement. This is really important because the ports, the seaports, like in Long Beach and LA and Oakland up here in the Bay Area, any trucks moving in and out of those seaports plus rail yards are going to have to be fully EV by 2035. So they must begin their transition now, because you have to have this, you have to have a time, right? You're gonna let some trucks are gonna get older, and as you replace them, if you plan to have that truck go into the ports, you're gonna have to have it. You should be buying an EV, because by the time we get to 2035, all drayage trucks that come into the ports will have to be EV. Number 3 is this, it affects state. Oh, by the way, the drayage trucks that we're talking about that come into the ports, we're talking about roughly 35,000 trucks across the state. So this isn't a large number, but it is those 35,000 that are going to really have to transition fast because of the volume of pollution and air quality destruction really that's going on near the ports. So the third is that state and local governments, there's actually some schedules whereby they have to transition their fleets, like a police car fleet, to EV in a certain timeline, so that that will happen much more quickly. And then fourth is the high priority in federal fleets, and particularly the high priority fleets are those that affect those companies with revenues of $50 million or greater, and with a fleet size of 50 or more. And so it is a select group, not a really small firm of, maybe 5 trucks. It is a firm that has 50 trucks or more and revenues of 50 million. And note that these trucks are all available now. As I told you, we've about 10,000 EVs that were sold last year. But there's actually a show going on August 14th in Oakland that'll be showing 50 different models of EVs at the Oakland Coliseum. And companies and drivers can go drive them, investigate them, and see what they look like. And like I've mentioned a little bit earlier, the total cost of ownership of these trucks is immensely different than a diesel truck. Because I don't know if any of you have electric cars, I do. You just don't have the parts to break. You don't have a radiator. You don't need air filter changes. It's a very different kind of truck. And so the total cost of ownership, because the maintenance costs go so low, is very different than a diesel truck. Okay, so those are the key elements of the rule. And we think this is critical for the state. So the waiver process. So one of the things that because we already had the ACT, already had a waiver, we weren't sure that we needed this one, but because of some other things, which we'll talk about in the threats, we are going after a waiver from the EPA. And so the waiver, basically, you go to the EPA, the federal EPA, to ask for a waiver, and you have to meet the minimum level of air quality standards at the federal level, which this does, and this actually exceeds them. And part of the reason that the state has been granted these waivers is because California has actually had the worst air quality in the country. And so we need to do a lot more for all the people who live here who are dealing with the health effects of poor air quality. Now, delaying this waiver causes crucial implementation time. And one of the things that we're already seeing is we've had to grant trucks, instead of it going all EV on the drayage trucks coming into the ports, they're already giving permission for new diesel trucks. And this is the last thing we want. So delaying the waiver, which it's still not done, the rule was supposed to take effect in January 1st of this year, and it's not. And so every day that goes by is weakening the benefits on public health and to the effects of the health issues on frontline communities, which we're going to hear a testimonial of shortly. So granting the waiver also provides regulatory certainty for other states. And an interesting thing about this rule, so when I first got involved in going to the meetings where we had with CARB, I would hear things like, the state of Massachusetts approves these rules. The state of Connecticut approves these rules. We want you to support them. And I was like, what's going on? This is California. Why is this happening? And so there is a relationship between California and about 12 or 13 other states that have agreed to basically adopt what California does. They may not have the budget California does to do a 3-year process. So what they say is, we're going to take what California does and we're going to adopt what's relevant to us. And so that's also a really big deal because this can help other states. Both the whole process to develop the rule has encompassed many communities and all kinds of facets of both like Teamsters and companies and individuals and communities. So it's a thorough process. So we need this rule to start happening. And it's not because the waiver is not granted. So what is the threat? Well, so California's Trucking Association and 17 states, as you can imagine, most of them being red states, filed a lawsuit to block the ACF rule. And all parties agreed that they wouldn't implement the rule until the waiver from the EPA was granted, which is why we're having this meeting, because that waiver process is finally underway. And we have important dates coming up right now and into September to influence the EPA. And we have to show up and say how much we need this, how much our health is at stake, the air quality of the state, how much it's necessary for all of us, so that the companies don't win and these other states. So they're going to be arguing that this rule shouldn't take effect, that it's not needed, and that it's they're going to argue things like the rule could is affecting interstate commerce because their trucks from out of state may need to come to our ports. But there's a balance here because it is the ports in California and therefore the people of California who are suffering the health effects. So with that, I want to bring in Sandy, who actually lives in San Diego and is going to give us a testimonial about her experiences. Sandy?
Hello, can you guys hear me? All right, thank you so much. Yes, so hi everyone, my name is Sandy Naranjo. I was the former port commissioner for the Port of San Diego. And just to give you a little bit of background on me, before I was a port commissioner for the Port of San Diego, I have been a longtime organizer for labor unions and environmental justice. And it's because when I was 3 years old, I was actually diagnosed with severe asthma in the emergency room. And my diagnosis, when I got diagnosed in the ER, I actually almost died. And the result of my diagnosis of my severe asthma is because of the constant exposure of diesel particulate matter. I grew up near the largest inland port of entry here in this country, and there's trucks coming in and out, and that impacted my lungs. And as you can imagine, it wasn't just me. Many children in my community have been impacted. And to this day, after 34 years after my diagnosis, if you look at the portside communities, like the community I grew up in, like San Isidro and the port sides of National City and Barrio Logan, you're going to see that children, just like myself, are diagnosed with severe asthma in the emergency room. So it's very clear that converting trucks to zero emission is a public health. It's because there's a public health crisis, and it's what we need to do. And so because of my work in organizing with labor unions and environmental justice, I was appointed as the port commissioner by my own city. The Port of San Diego is actually a unique port. It's very different from the Port of LA and Long Beach. Port of San Diego is a 5-member city port. So I was appointed by the city of National City to serve as the representative on the Port of San Diego. The first year I got appointed on the port, we dealt with trucks. So this is 2021. And what we did is to talk about what can we do about trucks. We need to make these trucks go zero emission. And so we drafted the Maritime Clean Air Strategy, which is a plan with 34 strategies to make our port zero emission. And of course, we have a section about trucks. But what was unique about our Maritime Clean Air Strategy is that we voted to say that we want all trucks to come into the Port of San Diego to be zero emission by 2030, 5 years before these deadlines. And so that took us about 9 months to do that because we had so much opposition. And mainly it's because it can't be done. It's a violation of the Commerce Clause. It's impossible, but we were able to adopt it. And so the point of us adopting it is because we don't want to wait for state regulation to tell us what to do. We want to be ready above and beyond state compliance. And also too, we wanted to help influence the infrastructure, because if we have a zero emission policy at our port, we could impact the border, the inland port of entry, the border, which, like I mentioned, is one of the largest ports in the country and arguably in the world. And so we had adopted that policy. to go 100% by 2030. So what we did is we did benchmarks, which is we wanted to go 40% zero emission by 2026, and then obviously 60% by 2030. And I could tell you, we're in the middle of 2024. And because of the very issue that we hear today, because we do have a Biden, and by the way, I loved how Biden Harris has done everything for zero emission infrastructure, billions of dollars in the EPA. But the problem is the fact that we don't have that waiver means we cannot meet our goals. I talk to, even though I no longer serve as a port commissioner, I do talk to other port commissioners from other ports. And what I've been told from the commissioners from the Port of LA, because of the fact that Biden administration has not enforced his waiver in the EPA, 1,200 diesel trucks have been registered at the Port of LA and Long Beach, which means because of SB1 in California, they have longer years of life, which means we're delayed in meeting the goals, which means we don't meet our climate goals, which means that frontline communities like the communities I grew up in are going to continuously be exposed to diesel particulate matter. So this is very, very important that we need to advocate and speak our stories and speak the importance. And so I'm very disheartened about the new registered trucks because I really want to see us meet our goals. I want to see us to have a zero emission infrastructure because it is possible. We have the technology. You just mentioned they're demonstrating trucks. There's infrastructure we're doing. But when we have new diesel trucks still on the road, it makes it even more challenging. And so with that, you guys have a call to action. We need to call the EPA and we need to push it because I'm telling you, it can be done. The Port of San Diego, they said the same exact thing. We have the same lobbyists and everything, but it can be done.
Okay, Sandy, thank you. So you've just heard more about why this is so important. Sandy actually lives down near the San Diego port, and LA Long Beach is actually even larger. So the problem is pretty severe. So the process has finally been kicked off by the EPA. And if you want to talk, there's going to be a public hearing and you get 3 minutes to talk. So you can register by tomorrow to talk on the August 14th meeting. And it starts, I've actually registered and I registered to talk in the morning if I can get my 3 minutes. So I'll be up at 7 a.m., sitting in front of the screen to give my little piece, because it's so important. So you can testify in person, you can register. They give you a couple options. They're going to try to slot people into the morning, afternoon, or evening. So you can put in a submission. Then you can also, if you can't make the meeting, you can submit written comments by September 16th. And I think we'll probably send out a summary later, but we actually have a link to where you go to submit that comment at the EPA website. So we have some information on the waiver toolkit that you can use to help develop your response. But we want to talk a little bit more about specifically testifying on August 14th. So when you testify, first of all, these are kind of the steps. You register to attend the hearing, and you get a block, hopefully when you're going to be up to talk. And then you'll get a Zoom link for the meeting. You need to come prepared, and you should really prepare and practice your statement ahead of time because you only have 3 minutes and they're going to, cut you off at that point. So you can stay, you can hear everybody else's comment. Sometimes that's actually fascinating because you hear what companies are saying, how they're opposing it. So it can be very interesting, at least for a little while, to before it's too repetitious to hear what other people have to say. So when you do it, you introduce yourself. My name is Judy Bortz. I'm a member of the California Action Climate, CAC member, and I'm the leader of the Transportation Committee. State your position, share a personal reason if you can, like Sandy just did, describe why the waiver should be granted, and conclude, and please ask them to act soon. I actually asked it, at one of our prep meetings, like they could possibly rule on this by the end of the year, and that's by all measures what we would like. The sooner the better. but it's not guaranteed. So you should know that. Now, I wrote one, and this is mine. I happen to have a daughter who lives in Long Beach now. She went down there for university, and she's been impacted by the poor air quality. She's actually living in Long Beach. And when you go down to the waterfront, you see, you know, the smog is really clear. You get a lot of, obviously, we have a lot of commercial boats as well. And that's another thing, by the way, not for this rule, but they are working on how to work on the maritime side of this as well. So you can see, you know, I talk a little bit about Climate Action California, our membership. Now, if you don't have that, you can talk about being an individual and that you've suffered from the health effects, right? Or you might belong to another group. You can mention that, or just your community and how they're experiencing this. And, you know, EV trucks are available. As I mentioned, there's this big show going on in the Cleveland Coliseum later in August, just showing all the trucks that you can get. They're available, and even Europe is advancing faster than us. They do provide a lower total cost of ownership. And the burden is really, and it shouldn't be a burden. The companies that work in our state should be wanting to see that we have better air quality than we do. And in fact, their total cost of ownership of these trucks is lower than diesel. So if you look at the big picture, it's a win-win, and that's always what you want. So, so here's the URL to sign up to speak at the hearing. Again, you need to do it by tomorrow. So if you're on this call, you could go right now and try to sign up. And that hearing is August 14th, so it's only a week away. You can also send in a written comment again, and you can elaborate more. When you do a written comment, you're not confined to 3 minutes. So you got the opportunity to use some of the talking points that we've provided and really elaborate on why this is both important, why it's needed in the state, and that it is a win-win for both the people of the state and for the companies in this lower total cost of ownership. And so there is my email, Judy at Climate Action California. That's my contact information. And we thank you for coming and for protecting our communities and our climate by defending these rules. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Linda.
Thank you, Judy. And thank you, Sandy. That was both really powerful presentations on why this is so important, why it will make a difference, and how you can help make that difference. Because without our community showing up, the industry will be there and their voices will predominate. So I hope everybody here can either comment in person and or in writing. I also wanted to say we are part of the coalition. We're tracking how many people are signing up to speak. So if you'd be willing to drop me a note to my email, I'll put it in the chat, and just say, you know, I signed up to speak at the hearing, then we can, Climate Action California, sorry, I cannot multitask. If we can let them know how many folks are going to be turning out from Climate Action California. So please drop me a just quick note. I signed up for the hearing, or I'm planning to send in a written comment. That would be really helpful. So we also wanted to give a little time for you to ask questions, but before that, and maybe even practice, if you'd like, what you're going to say, we're happy to make space for that. But I first just wanted to tell you about Climate Action California. Some of you will recognize, you're regulars with Climate Action California. We're glad you're showing up again here today. And others are new faces to me. I actually just joined the organization 3 weeks ago, so I'm still meeting our volunteers and getting acquainted with everybody. So I do want to let everybody know that we are organized, as I mentioned at the beginning, in volunteer-run teams. These teams are not geographically based so much as climate solution based. So if you have a passion, like today's topic, for electrifying transportation, then you could join the transportation team. It doesn't matter where you live, it even could be outside of California. We welcome everybody. As we see, like what we adopt in California is often a trendsetter for the rest of the country. So yeah, and if you'd like a different committee, you can see the choices here. We really try to hit those that are going to be the most impactful and most leverage at rapidly reducing greenhouse emissions and cleaning up communities and our air. So there's a link in the chat. Leah's going to put it in the chat to sign up to volunteer at climateactionca.org/volunteer. And it's just a really simple form. You could check any of these teams that you like to be part of. And there's other places to check if you have certain skills so we can get to know you. What happens after that is I reach out to you when I see your name come in, and we set up a one-on-one to talk for like half an hour so I can tell you more about Climate Action California, learn more about what you're interested in, and get you plugged in. I want to make a note that volunteer work is always done on a spirit of giving, right? There's no shoulds, there's no requirements. We don't say a minimum number of hours. We find that people are inspired to give because they see the difference that they're making. So I want to reassure you, if you're like me and you are juggling parenting and work and sandwich generation, having a lot of things on your plate, don't worry, we can find a small role for you. And even if it's just amplifying what our teams are doing, making a quick call, that really makes a difference. So the more people we have, the more power we have. So there's a role for every one of you. And a lot of our leaders have a lot of expertise coming in from different backgrounds. And we also want to tap into that. So if you have a skill and have more time to share it, we can also give you as big a role as you would like. With that, I want to make space for questions and answers. And also, if anybody who is part of Climate Action California would like to add anything to what I said about our organization, as I said, I'm very new, so if I missed anything important, please feel free to chime in.
So I'll add one comment about volunteering if you choose to do that. You don't have to come with a lot of experience. When I started working on the trucking rules, I didn't know much about trucks. So I got educated by the coalition. And so probably for the first while, a couple months, I just listened at the meetings and took in all the facts and was able to go and do additional reading. So you don't have to come in as an expert. You don't need to know it all. You just have to be willing to learn and spend a bit of time, pursuing that and then getting involved eventually. I mean, one of the things that I specifically got involved with the trucking was getting our legislators on board. So one of the things that we did is we collected, it was about 35 signatures from legislators, California legislators from the Assembly and the Senate, which we issued to CARB to say, yes, we want these rules and we want even stronger rules. And here are the things that we want to see you do. So that was one of the things I specifically led, was getting that letter from 35 of our Congress people, Congress and Assembly and Senate, to CARB, supporting the rule and saying they were on board. So again, you can take different avenues. Those are some of the ones that I've done.
Great, thank you for adding that. So yes, do people have any questions? There were, by the way, Judy, while you're presenting, there were some questions in the chat. So I did take a moment to answer some of them in the chat. So if you didn't think I fully answered your question, please feel to raise your hand. And I do see that John has his hand raised now. Why don't you go ahead, John?
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Linda and Judith as well, for your informative presentation today. Yeah, I wanted to comment on, I think it was Judith was telling us about how long-term the cost of ownership for electric trucks is going to be quite a bit less than it would be for diesel trucks, because you're looking at maintenance and everything else that goes along with it. And as an EV owner, I can certainly attest to that. I'm wondering about this, though. Trucking is so hugely important in California for the movement of things. And a lot of these companies that use trucks or own trucks, diesel trucks, they've made a major investment in their fleets. And I'm wondering about the cost of transition over to electric trucks. That's going to be a huge cost. And a lot of companies are going to look at that with the interest rates being what they are. And, they may desire to make that transition, but it's just not going to be a doable thing, at least in the current moment. I'm wondering, are there incentives out there, either federally through the Inflation Reduction Act? Maybe there's something at the state level that these companies can turn to make that transition happen. because it seems to me that it's just going to be very expensive for so many of them. Are you aware of anything that
Yes.
provide that financial support?
Yes, the IRA actually does provide, I believe it's $20,000 of a tax credit that you can get for the trucks. And I think there are also several programs in California, so there are incentives. I believe it is the federal level is $20,000 towards the initial cost. But when especially corporations that are over $50 million, that total cost of ownership really does make a difference, right? Because they are going to be doing regular maintenance. We have, Linda, I can give it to you later, but there's a wonderful success story. I think it's by Pepsi out of Sacramento that has established a whole hub of these. And so they use these trucks to do all their deliveries around Sacramento. And they have a great success story thing. It's a YouTube video of what they did and how they did it and what the effects are. But yes, there are in fact financial incentives as well.
Okay, thank you for responding to that. I don't want to take up too much time because I think there may be other questions. I just want to follow up quickly with this one. What has been the response from companies in California that rely on trucking in terms of making this transition? Are most companies positive it's something that they want to do, or has there been a lot of pushback, a lot of digging in heels? Where do we stand as far as that goes?
I say it's mixed, like anything. Like we've been trying to, like the Pepsi, I think it's Pepsi story, the success story we've been publishing, or the coalition has been working on various success stories so people can really understand the different components involved. I think some of the pushback has been on infrastructure. And so one of the things they're trying to do is work on permitting. There are also financial incentives from particularly the IRA on things like establishing infrastructure, the whole charging systems. So there are mechanisms where their pushback has occurred that everybody's trying to address, both the state, CARB, and communities with charging centers. So it's mixed. But I think so getting the success stories out is really a big deal because sometimes there's a lot of misinformation.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and give someone else a chance.
Thanks for your great questions, John. And as I'm scanning the faces for hands up, I wanted to also add that for those who've never given a public comment before at a virtual hearing like this, I understand that it could maybe feel a little intimidating. And I wanted to reassure you that you don't have to speak for the full 3 minutes. You only just have to say your name and where you're from and that you want them to pass the waiver. And if you wanted to add why you care, that's a bonus. But again, the numbers that are showing up is the most important. And if you don't have a thorough, impactful, long comment, that's fine. But if you want to write one out, that's also great. So I just want to say all the different levels, beyond no more than 3 minutes, but it can be quite a bit less. So now I'm seeing some hands come up. And I also want to flag, Judy, that there was a question about the climate issues with diesel exhaust, which is a major source of particulate matter. So maybe you could type a little bit in the chat. Actually, you probably should multitask. Let's just call on the folks here and then we'll get to that. But I do want to say that for the waiver, the justification the EPA needs to make it based on is on health and air quality more than rather than climate. So even though it definitely affects the climate, you should emphasize the other reasons, health and clean air, in your comments. So let's go ahead and take a question from Eugene. Eugene?
Oh, Eugenie, but I think Charlie had the hand up first, but is that okay? Yeah, I remember like I don't know if it seemed like it was over a year ago doing some kind of a testimony with EPA on, I think it was soot of trucks and so forth. And I'm in Los Angeles, I'm near, and so I guess my question is environmental justice a good argument to put in your testimony? Because I remember including that. I remember kind of looking at the maps of the pollution levels near the port of Los Angeles. There are certain communities like Wilmington that are much more adversely affected, or San Pedro. So I was just thinking I would see if I could find my testimony earlier from that aspect. And then there's the CAL environmental screen, which shows, how the health effects of, different communities around California, which is kind of a helpful guideline to see the difference. I mean, I think we're all affected by this air pollution, but people who are particularly close to those communities are much more affected.
Yes, arguing the environmental justice for all those communities is a big deal. That's why they were members of the coalition. When the CARB hearing occurred at the end of April last year, the number of people that turned out to talk about the health and safety issues for their communities was immense. And you really, the presence was overwhelming, and it was very well received. And it was, some of the responses of the CARB board were, it's high time we did this for our, exposed communities. And you heard that message a lot. So yes, you're more than welcome to add that or, elaborate on it, however it affects you, or, you're living in LA. LA has some of the worst air quality in the country. So this is a big deal. And we have learned, the coalition has done studies that the biggest argument that makes an impact is health and safety.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And then is it Charlie? Am I saying it right?
Yes, Charlie Toledo. Thank you. I do talk at a lot of public hearings, and I always think takes a lot of concentration to keep your thoughts to 3 minutes. But I'm wondering why hemp biofuels aren't in the discussion. I think I've been participating in other discussions as paid consultant around the environmental issues, and biofuels aren't on the topic. And that's actually very sustainable and clean. Electricity is the biggest use of water in the state of California, and California is in a serious water crisis. It's not a drought. It's not temporary. We're running out of water in the state. And because of some of the other boards I've sat on, I'm fully aware of it. I've been trying to bring it to the attention of the governor for more than 10 years, but they're still in denial. And the main reason they're not letting the public know about the water crisis in California is they're afraid of public panic. So based on this, I think that the climate change issues of reducing pollution are really, really critical for everybody, for the health reasons stated, but also that what I'm trying to do, and I'm working on this at state and national levels, is to get hemp to the discussion. Hemp is a biofuel. When they tested biofuels before and they said they weren't economically sustainable, they tested corn, and corn requires a lot of water and fertilizer. Hemp needs to be deregulated from a drug to an ag product. Hemp biofuel, it nitrogenates the soil when it grows. It takes carbon out of the air when it grows. And when you use it as a biofuel, which is a chemical formula for that is already established, it cleans the air. There's no pollution from hemp biofuel. So when it's growing, it's nitrogenated soil. It uses 60% less water than any other ag product. When the plant is growing up to 14 feet tall, it is absorbing carbon out of the air. So at every phase and step of hemp as a biofuel, it's clean, it's sustainable, it re-energizes the soil. It uses 60% less water than any other ag product. And so when we're talking about electric, the concern is, how is that electricity being generated? And I don't see hemp in the dialogue in California. And I am working with the Cal MTA program to bring hemp to the discussion, but I think this group needs to do that also. And I will make a point of making either a written statement or a spoken statement at the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie, thank you for your comment. I am not as familiar as you clearly are about hemp. I think that, the whole point is zero emission. And I think, in California, a lot of the groups that were part of the coalition felt that EVs, the electric batteries have kind of won this application. There are places where where other sources make the most sense. And when you try to divert resources across too many, like trying to ask a truck manufacturer to make multiple kinds of trucks that one would use hemp maybe, but one would use EV batteries. You have to be aware of the cost of doing multiple sources. So you're welcome to make a comment to that regard, but I think our point is they need to be zero emission. And zero emission is what is going to be a win-win for the state.
Okay, wonderful. How about, is it Malon or Malon? So I'm not sure how to pronounce. You can go next.
Thank you. I people keep mentioning the lower operating costs and fueling costs of EVs. It would be, is there such a thing as any kind of estimate for particular cases of when the lower operating costs would pay for the higher initial investment for at least one or two or some of the kinds of trucks?
Yes, in a total cost of ownership analysis, I have them in my files. Like you're saying, well, when's the payback kind of thing, right? Over how many years before you see it?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So yes, I have seen, I don't have any numbers on the tip of my tongue, but I know those kinds of assessments have been done. And by the time you look at the initial cost of the vehicle minus the incentives from like the federal program as well as the state, and you can get some state funds that have been made available. And then you look at, again, the drastically different maintenance costs. Yes, those numbers are available. I just don't have them right now. We could try to get back to you on that, but I've seen them and I know they're done.
Thanks for the great question and response, Judy. I did see Beverly have her hand up, but then I think you took it down. You're back up again. Go ahead, Beverly. Still on mute.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I had to figure
I hear
out that
you.
I had to be the one to. So I just want to quickly say, in case it wasn't read in the chat, that biofuels, including hemp, are not cleaning the air when they're being burned. They're being burned, so they are producing climate changing emissions. Hemp may be a better product for lots of things, but comparing it to electric, it's not. And the case about what are the vehicles being plugged into, our grid in California in particular, other states hopefully as well, are transitioning to renewables. In the 5-county Central Coast, we are having the target of 100% renewables by 2030, which is 5 years ahead of the state. So the state of California's goals are by 2035, the entire grid will be running on renewables. Whether we're able to reach that or not remains to be seen, but it is the goal. And so that means that the battery electric vehicle is not having tailpipe emissions. So locally, it's not producing pollution, but also at the source of its fuel, which is the electricity, will also be zero emissions and is ramping up right now to increased renewables. So our trucks, as well as our cars, will be driving on sunshine, wind, and water. Which way beats what biofuels can do.
So I'm realizing that this is a bit of a controversial topic, and there's more on the chat about it. So I think I'd just like to leave it at that and focus back in on the need for the waiver. And I think whether or not the waiver would allow hemp isn't something that we could figure out together here. The rule's already been written. So, but I do appreciate the discussion, and it's an important one. And there's always important things to consider on different sides of each issue. But I wanted to make space for reminding folks, if you haven't yet, if you could sign up today because tomorrow it ends. And once you leave this webinar, you may forget to do it. So please do sign up to give a comment. And I would love to know if you're doing that so we can let our allies in the coalition know and just see how successful this webinar was. Our purpose was to inspire people to give a comment. So please drop me a line if you are planning to or if you did sign up. And I also wanted to give a space for anybody with a question about how to craft your comment. Does everybody feel comfortable who are going to give a comment either verbally or in writing with what to say? Was the template, maybe we can go back to the sample that Judy shared. Does that seem like something that is accessible to folks that you'd be able to do something similar? Maybe some thumbs up if you feel like, yes, I've got this, or ask a question if you have any questions. Great, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, good.
7 a.m.
So we have about 4 or 5 minutes left on this call. We're going to end promptly at 1. But does anybody else have another question or comment that you'd like to share? Or someone who hasn't spoken yet like to, yeah, raise something.
Can you just mention again, like if you sign up for 7 a.m., I think I'm going to be in a different time zone that's even earlier than that. But do you know what the time range is that you would? I know I remember from doing this before, there was sort of like a time range and all of a sudden you're up, you know, and then, but what is the kind of window so you can kind of plan for it?
When I went to, I did register to give a comment and I believe it said morning, afternoon, evening, which didn't seem very specific because time zones, you know, they could be, what's my morning in California is already afternoon sometimes in other places in the country. So I'm actually not sure. Judy, did you notice if there's an actual time slot?
No, and I did mine like 3 weeks ago, so I don't remember. I know I signed up for morning.
But I mean,
You're
how
right,
long?
you are
was
right. I
the-
mean, I just intended to get up at 7 a.m. to get started because usually you don't even know till you check in.
Given that it's probably going to be running, I'm guessing from 10 to 5 East Coast time. So that would be 7 to 2. I'm guessing those windows are like 2 or 3 hour blocks. So if you did sign up, I would plan to be on for at least 2 hours. And that is kind of a big time commitment. But the difference that you're going to make is so important. Just think of the lives saved. So, but yeah, it's a good question. And wish we had more precise answer on that. But that's what we know. Any other questions or comments? Tim.
Hi, I don't think I'll be able to make the meeting because I've got 2 other meetings. That day's the California Energy Commission meeting from like 10 to 5 or later, and another meeting I have. So I'm going to probably do a written comment and send that in. And that, instead of being 3 minutes, you can make it a lot longer and, you know, put more documentation in it and things like that. So I think I'll do that. So I just want to mention that's an alternative if you can't make one of those times, or you get on the phone and you find out you're going to have to wait 6 hours.
Yes.
So
Thanks.
true.
And
so
great,
true.
great
Thank
presentation,
you.
by the way.
You know, written comments are good too. They always say at the meetings they're of equal value and they're read. So, and you know, in California they have to respond to those things. So, thank you. Just if you can't be there, go ahead and write comments.
Yeah, that's so important. Really good point. And it's definitely a way if you have, you know, a demanding job and you can't take that time away or other responsibilities, it's such a more accessible way. You can just do it on your own time and send it in. The deadline's also a little bit extended as well. So you don't have to do that by tomorrow. We shared the date at sometime in September. But I would we'd love to see if you do write a comment, please share it with us. You can email it to me and I'll share it with Judy and our team, but it would be great to see those coming in. It would be very inspiring to see people taking action and seeing what you're writing. So that would be great. All right, we have time for one last question or comment. If anybody would like the final word. Did anybody want to add a little more about the health effects of diesel exhaust? Janet?
Yes, and Jonathan put a note in the chat about this. I think it's really important to talk about the health effects of diesel exhaust, which is a lot of soot, particulate matter 2.5, which is a short-lived climate pollutant, and also the fact that most of the places where the trucking exhaust is the worst are vulnerable EJ communities. So this is truly an environmental justice issue. And I just hope people will make that point in your comments that, you know, we just have to get to clean trucks as fast as we can for the sake of everybody's health as well as the climate. And Jonathan, you may be able to elaborate on this, and Michelle has a comment too.
Just as I mentioned in the comment that I added, that the PM 2.5, that's black carbon, which is, and I agree, I think we need to focus mostly on the health effects, but it also does absorb infrared radiation and acts as a climate warming agent. It also turns out that these particles circulate through the atmosphere. Some of them end up falling on snow in Greenland, in the Arctic, and accelerating the rate of melt there. So they have a lot of bad effects. But I think especially for the EPA, the environmental justice and health effects are the most critical, but they are also a significant warming agent.
Yeah, very, very good point. Thank you, Jonathan and Janet. And let's give the final word to Michelle. Michelle, you're up.
Sorry, I don't have a health issue to talk about, but there's a lot of pushback about, oh, it's going to cost so much, and the the grid isn't ready for it, and so on. I went to a grand opening in San Bernardino, California, a few months ago. I think it was April, middle April, and it's it's a commercial company. They're called Watt, W-A-T-T EV, and they are installing EV charging, public truck EV charging installations all over in EJ communities, especially for, the independent truckers that can't go to Pepsi and charge. And also I have a friend, his name is Ollie Danner, and he runs zerorig.com, and he has a traveling EV truck show. And if you look him up, look up zerorig.com, you could, if you want to find out more about incentives, what trucks are out there, how much money you can save with an EV, check that out too. It's just, stop, we need to shut these people down that say, oh, we're not ready. We are ready.
Such a good point, Michelle. And I think that would be very appropriate to put in comments, just to have the EPA be reminded of that. So thank you all. We'll wrap it up here. Thanks for making your comments, and we'll see you at the hearing on Wednesday or in writing. Bye-bye.